What's going on, everybody? So today we're going to be talking about Smile 2, directed by Parker Finn. So in 2022, I feel like Parker Finn watched Truth or Dare and said, you know what, let me try and make that, but actually good. So he delivered Smile, which was so freaking amazing, especially because I feel like most people weren't expecting anything really memorable out of it, since it was pretty derivative of other material from the past, such as Truth or Dare or It Follows. So now Parker Finn has continued the journey with Smile 2, since inevitably, because of how much money the original made, of course there was going to be a sequel to it. We follow global superstar Sky Riley as she begins experiencing terrifying and inexplicable things, and overwhelmed by the escalating horrors and the pressure of fame, she now has to face her past. Right off the bat, Parker Finn was able to capture perfectly the feeling of dread, stress, and the anxiety of having to look over your shoulder again. Jump scares have the nasty reputation of feeling unnecessary and egregious, but just like in the first film, a lot of the jump scares were actually extremely well done and actually had weight thematically because they were actually important to the plot, since they added to the suspense and the tone that the movie was going for. I like that while a lot of the jump scares are just heavily sound based, a lot of them are actually more of an anticipation and quick flashes of disturbing imagery. Honestly, one of my favorite jump scares in the movie is towards the beginning when you see the entity, but it's so fast and no loud noise is used, but you can't help but flinch because of the tension that had built up in that moment. And that's a perfect example of how you don't have to use a horn in your audience's ears to get them to react. And it was fun because as a consistent viewer of horror, you kind of build formulas of how these moments are going to happen through cues, mirrors, sharp corners, you name it. So when these elements start to show up, you kind of go like 3, 2, 1, okay, yeah, there's a jump scare. But Finn kind of toyed with that and was aware the audiences were expecting these cues, so the direction of these jump scares were very off-putting because a lot of these sequences you're not really expecting, and it works. Another part I really loved about this film is that I guess because there wasn't a change of director, Finn really made it feel like a part 2 to the original film. Kinda like how Halloween 2 streamlines right after the original Halloween. Similarly, this film does the same thing. The performances were fantastic here. I'm personally a huge fan of Kyle Gallner. I pretty much love every performance he has ever delivered. And honestly, he has my favorite section of the film, which wasn't a surprise to me. He sets the bar so freaking high that it almost is detrimental because it felt too high for the rest of the film to keep up with, at least for me. Kyle Gallner's acting is amazing. It's so frantic and desperate, and in general, the opening was amazing. It felt so kinetic and fluid, and the tension was maxed out through the entire sequence. It felt like Finn made it a priority to make the audience immediately get back into that unsettled feeling that the first one had established, and what a way to do it with that opening. And an added bonus is that it all felt like it was one take, and I'm sure there must have been some invisible transitions because the sequence itself felt like it was 7 or 8 minutes long, but it was just so good. And throughout the movie, there's sprinkled a couple of long one takes, but the opening scene definitely was the cream of the crop for me at least. To be pedantic for a moment though, because his death was accidental, shouldn't the curse have been lifted, Naomi Scott being our new surrogate and lead was unbelievable. She delivered such a strong performance. Every nerve and shiver she feels, you also feel because of how expressive and immersive her story feels. And I do think it was a neat idea to have a celebrity superstar as our lead because they're so often misjudged or have the stigma of not being able to have any stressors or real problems because they're so rich. So the confrontations that she has with her mom about being unsupportive or not being able to really empathize with her really plays into the theme that the movie's going for. Or like during one of Sky's photo shoots when the photographer tells Sky, "Can you give me more?" Even more, even more. It's a bit on the nose, but the message gets across pretty well. And the movie balances very well the idea that this person isn't crazy and her life is actually falling apart, yet at the same time, it's kind of hard to also not believe that there's definitely some screws loose. I also really loved the flashback drive of the incident. It was very anxiety-inducing, as the shot is basically panning between both of the characters, and every time it pans across, you can't help but try and look towards the middle of the road and think, how close are we getting to that railing? It was just very well done. The gore and effects did not disappoint as well. You don't get like an abundance of these moments, but the few times that we do get it, it's quality stuff. They're gnarly and uncanny, and every time you think the camera's gonna cut away because it's done showing you, it still stays on it, and you see everything. Especially when paired with the amazing sound design, the music in this movie is so evocative, it's foreign and puzzling, which captures the emotions perfectly. In general, depending on what kind of viewer you are, the lines between reality and fantasy are way more blurred in this film than in the original. I'm kind of 50-50 on it. I feel like I get that it's supposed to build that paranoia because the more you doubt, the less you have to trust and lean on. To be honest, my gripes with this film start with the fact that the opening was actually too good, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like a film should always start strong to really capture the audience, but the beginning of this movie was kind of the peak for me. So it's hard because I feel like on top of that, they didn't have enough material left over from the original movie to really work with in a meaningful way. Especially because some of my bigger complaints about this film is that at the end of the day, there was no expansion on the entity or curse or whatever you want to call it that has been terrorizing these people. We didn't learn anything new that we didn't already know in the first film. The ending was extremely derivative of Truth or Dare, which I didn't necessarily love, and the twist for Gemma would have been way less obvious if you didn't introduce her in a normal way and then she goes MIA for the remainder of the film only to resurface when Sky needed her the most. Also, the runtime, I feel like it definitely could have cut out like 20 minutes, especially of the mid chunk, because of all the repetition of things happening to Sky. Like, I get that it's supposed to be Sky being stuck in this horrible cycle of things happening to her, but by that point, we got the idea. The only asterisk to that is that I'd say that I really did love the idea of more than one person doing the weird smile at you. It's surprisingly more isolating have that done to you by a bunch of people than just one at a time. And lastly, while this isn't specific to this film, so it's not as blatant of a critique of it, but I did like the allegory of substance abuse and the pressures of fame being really explored, but I just wish horror would move on from just exploring trauma. Like, we've had enough examples of movies that have already explored this in an excellent way and become perfect vehicles to understand it, but I just wish that it would let it rest, and then later down the line we can re-explore these same themes. And yeah, sponsored by Voss. Just kidding. If you get it, you get it. Overall, though, a very solid follow-up to the original film. It's enjoyable, and while I'd still prefer the original film, Smile 2 is definitely close in quality and just as unrelenting. But that's it for me. Hopefully everybody had a happy Halloween. I'd appreciate a thumbs up, subscribe, and sincerely yours, Anthony.